Okay, so this is kind of a short video, and I was inspired to make this by an email that I received from somebody who attends the center. And this is a woman who I think is very sincere and who is just, to me, she appears to me to be just methodically, slowly being led by the Holy Spirit deeper and deeper into Christ. And she wrote this email in around the subject of theology. So what I have her doing is reading a book on theology. And if you want to know what theology means, what theology is you could read the Bible, okay? And any aspect of the Bible that you're reading has a certain meaning and a certain import, a certain worldview, a certain audience. There's a lot of things when you read the New Testament that have to be taken into account in order to understand the text. If you don't know who the author is and you don't know who they're writing to and why, then you will miss a ton of the context of the Bible, and you may import knowledge into it and insight and perspectives into it that aren't really there. So one of the ways that I think it's great to describe theology is what the Bible is saying if you can hear it all being said at the same time. So if every sentence was all being said at once and you understood it all of it at once, what is it saying? And that's what theology is. So there's a worldview that comes through when you study theology. And this woman is coming from a heretical Christian religion that teaches that you become God. So her theology, what she was taught from a kid growing up, is that you're on the planet to learn and grow, and but when you die, you go to heaven, but what happens to you in heaven is you become a God. And so there's a whole kind of experience she had with that theology. Then she left that religion and has become Christian and is reading the New Testament, and then she read this book that I really like about Christian theology. And so I wanted to read her a little bit of her email. Here's what she's written that's happening to her as she absorbs theology. And you have to think of theology as food for the mind. It really helps to have good theology. And I was lucky enough to have a priest that was a theologian, and he was a good theologian. So his sermons weren't anyone preaching. He said to me he did not consider himself a preacher, but he considered himself a teacher. And that was maybe an understatement, because it felt like you were getting the level of teaching that he gave was, college level theology for sure. And it was every single week after week. And I didn't really value theology at the time. When I met him, I was coming from the New Age movement, which was very similar to what this heretical Christian religion, this woman is coming from. There's some similarities between the New Age movement and that movement. Both of them have a redefined Jesus, a Jesus that isn't really Jesus. Both of them have core beliefs that don't align to what Jesus taught at all, and don't align to what the early disciples thought and what the church fathers taught. And they're heretical positions. And while I never thought I was God, I never really did totally go for that. But that is prevalent teaching in the New Age movement. You're taught that we are all God, you're God, and if you dissolve your false personality, you'll remember that you are God. And that's a really prevalent teaching in the New Age. And I think it leads to a narcissism and arrogance. But also this woman in her email to me shows that it also reveals a real pressure and an inability to find humility in a certain way. So I thought you guys would really appreciate this. So here's her email to me. I was reading Theology for Beginners this morning, and I want to make sure my understanding is on the right track. The chapter I was reading was about human nature and how Christ became fully human. And if you don't know, that's one of the core teachings of Christianity, that God really did incarnate and become human. And it's not the case that, as the Gnostics might say, or as the New Age might have said, that God pretended to be human with Jesus. The idea of the incarnation of Christ is that God actually became a human being and lived a real life as a human being and took his body, his humanity, up into the heavens at the ascension. So think of this. There's so much theology built on the fact that God became human. So this is just a fragment that she's picked up on in this book that's freed her soul from all kinds of the wrong ways of thinking about herself and God. So back to her email. The sentence that struck me: but sin is not a way of being man. It is a way of misusing manhood. We misuse ours often enough. Jesus never misused his. He was more completely man than we. So I'm going to read that one more time because it's worth really absorbing it. But sin is not a way of being man. It is a way of misusing manhood. We misuse ours often enough. He never misused his. He was more completely man than we. And this is her commentary on that sentence. And this really struck me, because growing up in the religion I did, I feel like I was taught that Jesus was teaching us how to be God. But here it seems more like Jesus is teaching us how to be fully human. And the implications to this are really profound, because being raised in that religion I was raised in, you have this sense of intense pressure and arrogance to be perfect. You are striving to be like God. You believe that when you die, you will become God. And so your actions have all this pressure and denial and pride. But what this book is saying is that Jesus was not teaching us to be like God, but rather how to be fully human, which means to be reliant on God. And she wrote reliant in all capital letters. And that's where the intense humility comes in. I read that section and felt like a wave of lowliness came over me. And there's a little more I want to read that she wrote, but I want to talk about that lowliness. So there's different ways to get to it, but Jesus said he is lowly of spirit. And not enough is, in my opinion, in Christianity, not enough is made of that. In a lot of sects of Christianity, it seems like triumph is overvalued, overemphasized. And remember I said theology is if you could hear the whole Bible at once, everything being said at once. And when we get out of balance with our Christianity, it's because we are overemphasizing some scriptures over others. And in the New Age movement that I was a part of, triumph, success, brightness, confidence, power, joy, all of this was overemphasized. And most of those things are good things, but they're not the center of the wheel. And they're not meant to be taken apart from other things. So this woman, being raised in a heretical Christian religion, it's really a pseudo-Christian religion, she's taught that she's going to become a god, and then everyone around her that she knows, they're all just temporarily embarrassed gods. I mean, that's a joke. I don't think that's really how they all feel. But they're all just waiting to be crowned as gods. And I think that's a very terrible belief system to be under if you're going to find the lowliness, the poverty of spirit that Jesus speaks of in the Beatitudes, the purification he speaks about in the Beatitudes, the meekness. That lowliness is so profoundly powerful. And it heals, it's fair to say that lowliness that Jesus taught heals a great deal of emotional suffering. A great deal. It's fantastic to discover that as if you were like me, that all the while in your life you've been trying to overcome your suffering, to get up above it, it's fantastic to discover that you can get under it, that you can find God in it also, that instead of going up and trying to get up and out of your suffering, your sin, your problems, your struggles, you can go directly down into them and be fully present with them, and that you find Christ there, and that the feeling of that is a feeling of lowliness. It's a feeling of sinking down, but in a good way. And there are places deep enough in that lowliness where you are underneath the waves. If you've ever been to the beach, we went with my daughter and we were having so much fun. It didn't take us too long to realize that when the big waves came, we were trying to withstand them, or we were having fun getting hit by them. It was really fun. But sometimes they hit pretty hard. And it didn't take us very long to realize if we just sunk down, you still experienced the swell of the wave, but it all crashed over you and it was smooth if you went under. But if you tried to stay on top, it didn't work out so well for us. And it's like that with these waves of emotion which are so laden with sin. Pride and anger and fear and lust, and all these things are so tumultuous to us that there's a way under it, which is lowliness of spirit, which is humility. And this is what she felt and experienced from this book, and this book tends to transmit it. That's something else about the Christian tradition. If you haven't read a lot of the early church fathers and writings, and the writings of the saints, and this book is from neither. It's neither a saint nor a early church father. But there's a lot of power that comes through Christian literature that is transmitted to you, that you get a feeling of it. You experience the power itself. You experience it. And this is what's happening to her with this book. So she goes on to say, I think these passages just really nailed me and made me realize the fallacy of this assumption I was raised with, which was that I needed to have God's nature. I needed to be perfect and independent and self-sufficient. But the whole promise of Christ's life was that he was showing us how to be fully human and whole, which is through complete reliance on God and the understanding that human nature is not sufficient by design. And I have to stop there. She goes on, I'm going to read it, but listen to what she said. She's getting it. She's coming to understand that human nature was designed to need God. That we were never, by design, it's not a flaw. It's not because of sin. We were designed to need God. Another way of saying that, a better way of saying that, is that we were designed, all of our faculties, capacities, and abilities, our creativity, our ability to love, everything about us that is good was designed to be a vessel for God's power to pour into the world. And so if a person is raised without knowing this, or raised in a religion that knows it but doesn't actually do it, or that is filled with pride in one way or another, if a person doesn't come to understand that self-sufficiency is sin, it's the primary sin of self. It's the primary sin of pride. So you're raised in a culture that tells you to be self-sufficient. You're raised in a culture that tells you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're raised in a culture that admires and reveres these very selfish, self-centered, self-made people who are not in deep prayer at night, who are not in doubt, who are not broken and hoping in God's grace, and hoping for God's love and hoping for God's guidance and hoping for intimacy with God. We're raised in a culture that if you do the exact opposite of Christianity, you can be praised greatly for this. You can become famous. You can become admired by a large chunk of the world. And you could be doing everything exactly the opposite of the way Jesus taught. And so this woman is starting to see, she's seeing it. So she's talking again about her nature. In fact, I'll reread that sentence. Which is through complete reliance on God and the understanding that human nature is not sufficient by design. It's designed to need God's grace. So beating myself up for being human and not being enough feels akin to a turtle beating itself up for having a shell and not fur. It's a useless waste of energy to push against what is in its nature. And then the rest of the email is just asking if I think she's on the right track. And I do. I think she's right on the right track. And she's at a stage of spirituality where it sometimes comes on the other end of what some people call a born-again experience. A lot of times people will give their lives to God and they'll be rocketed into this triumphant power and joy. And it's real, that's God's power. This happened to me. Mine lasted 10 years. Like it's very real. But there's a stage beyond that where you are asked to grow in a deep, deep lowliness of spirit. A much more mature kind of Christianity, a much more mature kind of relationship with God. It's a stage where you find that in that triumphant energy and in that place God raised you to, sometimes if you're raised into it, not everyone comes in that way, but in that place that you're raised to, your pride has gone with you, the self has gone with you, you are still passing on some family dysfunction without meaning to, and you start to see it. And she's in a stage where she's ready to see all of that. And so even though she was raised in a certain heretical sort of pseudo-Christianity, and I was raised in the New Age, what she's found applies to everybody. Because if you grow up in the United States and in many other countries, you have been taught a lie about self-reliance. You've been taught a kind of pride that you didn't have a choice. Before it was already ingrained in you, you were taught to have this kind of pride. And here she is reading good theology and being shown the antidote to a pride she didn't even know she had and a pressure that put on her. Now, some people will feel that pressure, but also feel arrogance along with it. And I'm sure she does too, but you can see in her email what a relief it is to find, I was never, ever supposed to try to be that. It was never intended by God for me to try to be so amazing, so powerful. In her false religion, to be God itself. See, and she said, I was never meant to be that. And she finds this relief, and it's a sinking relief. It feels like you go down. And, this is a Jewish tree of life behind me. And when I shoot my videos, you can only see the roots. So, but the tree goes up, it's really neat. It goes all the way up like this. It's so wonderful. And I love this symbol because so many people focus on going up. Joy and triumph and power and confidence, all these things. And that is part of the tree. But what about the roots? What about what's under it? Because that's part of the tree too. And if you grow up higher than you have roots, you're able to be toppled over. And you could dry up because you don't have enough roots in the ground to get moisture. So if Christianity is looked at like a tree, which is kind of the way I think of Christianity, if I was going to make a map of Christianity, I would use a tree as the symbol. The roots are humility. The roots are lowliness of spirit. The roots are surrender. The roots are knowing your place. You know, Jesus tells the story of, hey, if you're invited to a dinner by a king or an important dignitary, I can never remember. I don't have a retentive memory. But if you're invited, sit way in the back. And then you'll be invited to come up further, closer to the important person. But if you sit up front, you'll be shamed by being asked to go back. And this is him teaching you the way. That's actually a profound spiritual teaching. Just lower yourself in humility. And it's accurate is the thing, because we are creatures. And if we pay attention, I think this can be noticed in prayer. I've certainly had some quite profound experiences with this, where you are surrendering and you're sinking and you get lower and lower. And I remember one time getting to a place so low that I realized, this is hard to explain, but my integrity was there. Like, I exist. I exist. I'm this being, this human being that God made, and it exists. And I'm experiencing the fact that I exist. I know how that sounds a little hard to grasp, but I was just having an important and quite profound experience of the fact that I exist. But as I went deeper and deeper into prayer, I came to a place where there was no root, where that went beyond myself. And since I was coming from a perspective of self, of my existence, it was shocking and a little scary to realize that I have no root within myself for myself. Now that experience continued, and I had the experience of realizing that I have no root within myself at all, that my only root is in God, and that there is nothing within me whatsoever that even holds itself in existence. And it felt quite precarious. It felt quite unnerving. It was scary at first, just until I noticed God was holding me in existence. So it was quite an experience. It was quite a realization to really just become palpably aware, consciously aware, that I can't even hold myself in existence. Like, just the fact that I am can't be taken for granted. I wouldn't exist. We would all cease to exist were God not holding us in existence. And God would never not hold us in existence, but that's no reason to be unaware of the fact that our own existence is dependent on God. And if you really absorb theology, if you don't just hear it as, oh, I'm supposed to learn this, and this is what Christianity says, and you gotta slow down, and you have to think about and pray about what it means that God made you, that you are one of God's ideas, that you were designed to be in relationship with God, that all of your capacities are only good and true and useful if they are a vessel for God's power in the world. But more than that, at an even more fundamental level, that you wouldn't exist at all if God wasn't still holding you in existence. And that realization, when you come to that I wouldn't say I'm humble, I wouldn't say that, but definitely you're at least introduced to humility. You're introduced to humility through that teaching. And if you contemplate that and come to accept that, you may not become profoundly humble, but you will definitely be permanently humbled by that knowledge. And that's the power of theology. We could be talking about all kinds of other theology. There are all kinds of other just points that just hit so hard. But just that seems to be the root of everything, that God made you. And her heretical teaching, and mine in a different way, her heretical teaching that she received, her heretical theology, took that away from her. It never, ever invited her to find that deep humility. And that's a genuine tragedy. And so as she comes into authentic Christianity, as she comes into just, like the actual teaching of Christianity, she is struck and humbled profoundly, but also relieved and brought to some kind of peace. And that's because she's finding her rightful place in things, right? It's stressful to try to be something you're not, and it's stressful to try to be somewhere you're not. It's extremely stressful. And that's called pride. But, we don't always recognize it as pride because we were raised in it. If you're raised on planet Earth, you have pride because everyone does. And you've been imprinting on these people since you were a toddler. So you kind of have it before you know you have it. And so this is the power of theology. And in this particular case, it's the power of knowing that you're a created being, that you are a creature. You're something God made. And any Christianity that doesn't emphasize that enough will then have its members lack that deeper humility and that deeper surrender. They'll be too much focused on, you can focus the wrong way lots of ways, but they'll be too much focused on their triumph. They are saved. The power we have in Christ. All these things are true. They're true. But even in the heights of union with God, even were a person to become a saint, and it's attested to by all the saints. Teresa of Avila is my favorite, and she talks about her ascent into the highest stages of prayer, which are the stages of holiness, and it's quite fantastic. I mean, her experience was unusual, but she had all kinds of abilities, like Jesus had. She had a ton of mystical abilities. She levitated. She just had a lot of power of God flowing through her in a profound and exceptionally profound way. So she's a little unusual that way. But she's ascending these places, being brought into higher and higher places. But all through her literature, she talks about how you need more humility in order to enter the higher stages. And each successive stage that is higher requires more humility. So that's the tree. That's the tree. You're growing roots down, not just up. And I feel like in the New Age movement, we were not taught deep humility. In fact, I think the New Age is quite a broad system, but, I was quite well read, and I knew tons and tons of people in the New Age movement, and I don't believe that the New Age teaches humility. In fact, I think it teaches, probably ends in narcissism. I'm not even saying it's intentional. I don't think it is. I think the theology is wrong. The theology is wrong. Too much emphasis on the triumph. Too much emphasis on that. And not enough emphasis on surrender and lowliness and how small we are and how in need we are of God. Same thing with this woman. And so you could hear in her email how it's really freed her. And this was a big one. So what does this mean to her? Well, I would say she has finally found the foundation for the whole Christian relationship. She's found the foundation of salvation. You can experience blinding light. That's happened to me. Actually happened to me reading the same book. It rocketed into heaven with God. It's blinding white light. For me, it lasted for 3 hours, I think. I was reading 5 hours, actually. I was reading the book, and I kept feeling these waves of love from God. And finally it became so strong that the book fell out of my hands, and I experienced God's just blinding white light just wash over me. And I closed my eyes, and I was, even with my eyes open, I was seeing the white light. Closed my eyes, I'm immersed in this white light. And it lasted 5 hours, but the experience itself felt like it lasted about a few minutes, because what had happened was I went so absorbed into that light that I forgot I was Clinton. That's okay in Christianity as long as it's not permanent. Eastern spirituality would want you to forget you're Clinton forever, and then that's enlightenment to them, but not so with Christianity. That's another point of difference with theology. Christianity, it's essential that we remain human. God made us human, and it was good. We're not trying not to be human. We're trying to be fully human. But in this encounter, I call it passed out in that light, and there was just blinding white light, and there was no sense of time or awareness of time. There's only that infinite love forever and ever and ever. And then I didn't have a face yet, but it's hard to explain. I didn't have a face, but my face poked out of the light just this much, and I could see the world. And I could see that God was holding the world in existence through its power. And then my face disappeared again. Don't know how long I was gone, because there's no sense of movement, there's no sense of self, so there's no way to measure time. I think that's eternity, infinity. Then my face poked out again, same view, I could see the world, disappeared again, and the third time my face poked out, again just this much, and this time I saw myself standing on earth on my mother-in-law's front lawn. This was when I was just coming out of the New Age. I wasn't too far. I was out of the New Age, but I wasn't too far out of it yet. And I was reading theology for beginners. This is just theology, but it's just Christian theology. And this happened. And I saw myself standing on the lawn, my mother-in-law's lawn. And I was so filled with joy. And I said, I get it. I get it. The New Testament really is what Jesus left so we could become like him. And I knew that meant miracles too. I just knew it. And then I came out of the experience, and it had been 4 or 5 hours of just being absorbed in God's light. And that was needed for me. Why did God give me such a profound experience with the New Testament? Well, I think, you don't know God's purposes, but just from my perspective, because I had been taught from a child that the New Testament had been completely changed. The real meaning of Christianity had been lost, that it had been changed purposefully by bad actors to control people, that Jesus was really a Hindu, he had really studied in India, that Jesus really practiced Eastern meditation, and that all of that had been lost. I had been taught that since I was a young child. And because of that, even though I was drawn to Jesus the whole way in the New Age, I was always into Jesus, but my understanding of Jesus was wrong. It was completely wrong. I still had a relationship with Jesus, but it's a relationship poisoned by bad theology. Because my sincerity was true. When I reached out to Jesus, I really meant it. But the Jesus I was taught of was false. Same as this woman, by the way, who was taught a false Jesus. And so I think that experience was so helpful to me, because I needed to know. I needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I could trust this book, this collection of works from the early Christian church that we call the New Testament. And I had to know that I could trust it. And there had to be no doubt, because all of what I'd been taught falsely, and at that time I hadn't learned about to really value education. And the internet wasn't out yet very much either, so you couldn't just debunk the things you'd been taught that were lies very easily. And so I just needed to know that the New Testament is true. And it is what Jesus left. And that was helpful, because, coming from the New Age, it's all it's like you couldn't even see sin in people. You weren't allowed to. Judgment and discernment were conflated, so that if you saw sin in people, you were sinning. So your hands were tied. It feels to me like that theology is meant to tie your hands while making you feel exceedingly free. But you're in bondage, but you feel exceedingly free. And I could go on, I could make 10 videos about the different ways in which that is true. So, but then coming from that place where it's just all positive, everything's joy, everything's love. Don't talk about sin, don't talk about all that. Come right and wrong, just take it easy. Just get into love. That's all you need to know is love. That's what we were taught, and it sounds good. It sounds kind of true. And then I'd read the New Testament, and it'd be kind of a downer because it deals with the sin of the world. It deals with the sin of humanity, fallen humanity. And I mean, now it's just amazing to me that I couldn't see the truth of that. Just look around the world. Of course we've fallen. It's absurd to think we haven't. It's literally absurd to think we haven't fallen. And in the New Age, I was taught that when you stop seeing sin altogether, that's when sin will disappear in the world. So its answer to healing sin in the world was to never see it. Then I'd read the New Testament, and it didn't sound like Jesus was saying that at all. It sounded like he was saying we're deeply sinful. And it sounded like if you read the New Testament altogether, there was a very, very serious need to see it and to admit it and to repent of it. And that's a very different path, which isn't all sweet, which isn't just sweet, rosy paths. So the point is, theology feeds your soul. When you're absorbing the New Testament, and especially when you're absorbing the early church's writings on what they thought those works meant. People don't realize there's the New Testament, but before the New Testament was formed into one book, there were already endless commentaries on the books, starting all the way back to disciples of the disciples. So, first generation stuff, very close. And people don't realize that. And I remember when I read some of the early church writings, I don't remember which ones they were, Chrysostom or somebody. I remember reading it and thinking to myself, I have never heard Christianity preached. I don't even know what it is. It was so deep. And it satisfied my natural craving for deep spirituality. But it was Christian. Like Jesus. And so, like, and I love my mom, and she's in heaven, not worried about it now, and I'm not worried about it either. But to be taught that all of that was lost, and then to find out that there's not even a generation where it was lost. Like, we got the New Testament writings, and we have letters that came while all that was happening. Letters about what Jesus taught, and then the New Testament, and then there's this unbroken chain from Jesus through the disciples on forward through the church. We have that information. Nothing was lost. Nothing was lost. And that is, rocked my world. And same with this girl. The heretical Christian pseudo-religion that she was a part of taught the exact same thing, that everything had been lost and that her religion had restored it. And the New Age teaches the same thing. It's just a typical demonic teaching. They come in with sometimes making you feel power. They come in making you feel bliss sometimes. But the message is always, Jesus wasn't who they said he was. Jesus is something else. They've got it all wrong. Then they offer you some great sounding thing that Jesus was, but when you weigh it all on balance, it's always a loss. It's always a take away from Christ. It's always now Christ is less. It's also often just like the old heresies. Jesus was only God. Jesus was only human. They take some chunk. Jesus is fully God and fully human. They take that and they take away from it and then wrap it up in a package that it's more. And then it doesn't work because the whole act of Jesus and the incarnation and the power of God that came through him was revealed to us through Christ. It's revealed by the God that made us. So when you understand it well, it maps with your soul and it works. You could go to a church where it doesn't work, and you can talk to a certain preacher, it doesn't work, but that's because they don't understand it and they don't really have it. But when you have Christianity, it works. It fits. It addresses your predicament. It correctly addresses it. It correctly diagnoses what is wrong. And it offers a path that actually works for a human to be freed and brought into intimacy with God. Okay, thanks for listening. I appreciate everyone who watches. And I should say, this is not my style, but do like my video and do subscribe. It really helps. I want to get the message out to more people. It's not a really polished channel. I never intended it to be a YouTube channel. But there are people that are contacting me because of these videos, and I really do want to be of use and help people find authentic Christianity and deep Christianity. Okay, thanks everyone.